Right, well, it's budget day, so what better time to bring in our political panel, former Victoria Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy. Let's start brief. All right, 10, 15 seconds, sum up the budget as we know it so far. Stephen, you first.
Back in black, and Jim Chalmers will be right about his inflation forecast, not the Reserve Bank.
All right, pithy. Michael, your response to that?
Back in black temporarily because of massively high commodity prices, massive increases in taxations and full employment. Chalmers is using the budget and all the commentary around the budget to pressure and intimidate the Reserve Bank into not raising interest rates before the election time.
All right. So this is what's interesting about this budget. I think never have we seen one forecast in a budget be so central to a government's fortunes. If Stephen Conroy, Jim Chalmers, if you like, or Treasury, we should say, I guess, who's put this forecast in, Treasury is wrong, how much does that hurt Labor ahead of the next election, do you think, if inflation is well above that? Because there's a huge disparity between the RBA and Treasury's prediction on inflation.
Mate, I'm going to borrow from someone you know well up in Canberra, Shane Wright, who wrote a great article a couple of weeks back where he said if Reserve Bank was the coach of your footy team, you'd have sacked them by now. They have been wrong 80% of the time about their inflation forecast. That is an embarrassing position for Michelle Bullock to be backing up after Phil Lowe. So they have been consistently wrong. They've been consistently wrong because their modelling is wrong, because they make assumptions about wages and how that feeds into the system that are from the 1980s. And the model is completely wrong. And that is why Treasury have consistently, this isn't just a recent thing, Treasury have consistently had different figures with some quite wide disparities, and I don't mean 10% wide, but in terms of economic terms, a point or so differences around these issues for a period of time. So it's not a question of what happens to Jim, it's what happens to the people on the Reserve Bank board who've been advocating the freeze / oh no, we can talk about putting wages up. I mean, Michelle Bullock admitted last week that they were talking about putting interest rates up. I mean, what planet are these people living on? The economy is being crushed by interest rates that the Reserve Bank have the handle on the lever.
Certainly spending has been crushed. So, Michael, the flip side to this, I mean, the opposition has a lot invested in this too, doesn't it? Because, it doesn't really matter what policies are presented. Yes, they can change some things around the tax cuts, maybe the nuclear policy is eventually announced. If this is right, if inflation comes down this much and multiple rate cuts happen before the election, then it's going to be hard for Peter Dutton to get much traction, isn't it?
Well, there won't be multiple rate cuts before the election, nor will there be multiple rate increases. But Stephen's narrative is indicative of what Labor are trying to do, which is to put pressure on the Reserve Bank for calling them clowns and fools and they're incompetent. I mean, Stephen, Treasury forecast a budget deficit this year just in December. They're out by $10 billion, so it's going to be a $9-something billion surplus. So they're wrong by $10 billion. Treasury have one of the worst forecasting records we've ever seen, along with most economists. So you just don't know. But what we're seeing here is an attempt, Tom, to pressure the Reserve Bank into believing that we're coming into a very low inflationary environment. Don't even think about raising interest rates, because if they do, Labor won't get re-elected. If there's 2 rate increases, Labor will not get re-elected, even in a minority government. So what's the message out of this budget? The main message that Chalmers is trying to inculcate the community with is that, no, we're defeating inflation. There's absolutely no reason for need for interest rate rises. Listen to me, Reserve Bank, because this is what I'm telling you. That's what he's trying to do out of this budget.
All right. I mean, to be fair to Treasury, part of what they so-called forecast, and the reason they were wrong on that deficit, is they've got to lock in things such as an iron ore price, which we all knew was going to be higher. Stephen, let me ask you this. Real reform, real spending reform to address the structural deficit, which remains, that hasn't really gone on as yet, has it?
Well, seriously, I've been having this discussion about the structural deficit for 25 years. The Liberals pretend, they put the hair-chested shirt on for like 24 hours, go out and say, oh, the structural deficit's still there. Neither party pays any attention to the economic concept of a structural deficit. Okay, so let's just be honest about this. This is not a measurement the Australian people understand or care about. It's not a measurement that no matter how many times Angus Taylor might want to say it in the next 72 hours, he believes in or will deliver on. So structural deficit
is it a measurement that matters?
Are just an economic theory. No, it's not, because for 25 years, no one's I'm struggling. There might be one or two budgets over 25, 30 years I've been involved in politics that's actually done something about the structural deficit. Nobody.
Well, there was the
pays
Abbott
any
one.
attention
That was pretty keen to address that, wasn't it?
I said one or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that went down in flames and cost them Tony Abbott his prime ministership. So, look, good luck to people who want to advocate for structural reform around that.
I'm just pointing out that was the one that sort of jumps to mind. All right. Well, let me ask you this, Michael, because the coalition's talking about spending restraint. Now, they've got what they call the speed limit, 23.9%. Sounds very arbitrary to me, but there you go. God. Of spending to GDP.
It's just totally fictitious. It's Michael's age divided by 2.
But well, that's a bit unkind.
Seriously, pluck it out of the air. And that's kind to Michael. He's liking that. Look at his smile.
Well, he likes the age bit. I'm not sure he likes he'll be terribly
the 46 bit. No, he's happy to be 46.
The pejorative on his party. But this is the thing. By the end of the coalition's time in government, whilst they'd had spending restraint in the lead up to COVID, after that, if you look at the forward estimates from the last coalition budget, Michael, they weren't obeying this so-called speed limit. So what happens? Is there another big commission of audit coming if Peter Dutton wins?
No, but Labor's figures for the budget are off the back of the record spending that took place during the pandemic. You have to go to the pre-COVID spending of around 2% and a bit increases. And not the 4%. But Labor start at the 4% and say we're not increasing spending much. Well, it should be using the pre-COVID numbers. And by the way, if you say, we all knew commodity prices were going to be higher, Tom, well, all of us except Treasury knew that, did we? Well, what are they doing? They
just lock in $55 a tonne.
Yeah, but why?
Because
why
are they supposedly considered the amount.
That's for the iron ore price. And why do they do that? I mean, it always seems to be wrong.
Well, isn't that something the coalition started? So they,
I know.
So they,
but hang on, these are Treasury figures. Which
Michael was happy.
By the government.
Michael was happy.
No, Stephen, I'm not happy if Treasury put in figures which they know to be wrong. And secondly, Stephen, you would be the only person in the world, I think you've got an economics degree, you'd be the only person in the world that doesn't think a structural deficit is important. Of course it's important. It tells you what the underlying position of the budget is. Expenditure and income. If you don't take notice of the structural deficit, and you say, because it's not discussed and people don't care about it, that's fine. Perhaps they don't because it's too much detail. But when you get rid of the top and tail of intermediate economic activity, iron ore price goes up, it's down, and revenues go up, they go down, etc. I mean, what is the actual baked-in expenditure and baked-in revenue that you can forecast? And if Jim Chalmers has been hit in the backside by a rainbow with high commodity prices, very low unemployment, and massive, bracket creep tax increases, and he thinks he's a hero, I mean, he's the luckiest treasurer that I've seen in my lifetime.
Since Peter Costello. Peter Costello.
Well, not since Peter Costello, because he paid off the government debt, kept government expenditure.
But hang on, Peter Costello had the rivers of gold running as well, Michael, didn't he?
They did have big commodity prices during that time. But hang on, he kept government expenditure under control and delivered 10 or 11 surpluses. And they weren't all good economic times, by the way. There were some difficult economic times. But Chalmers is now going to forecast deficits for the next three years going out to 27, 28.
A few budget watchers suggest some of the sort of locked-in benefits, in particular around super and so on, were things that Labor and then the coalition had to try to unwind for many years. But anyway, I'll end it on that.